Hey everyone, it's Ben from EVILE. I'm here to talk about my 10 most favourite thrash, metal or rock tracks. You might have seen that some of the other guys from the band have been doing these videos as well, so I thought I'd chime in and give you a few of my own insights into what albums make me tick and some of the influences that I've learned over the years from watching different drummers and listening to these particular albums. They're in no order. I haven't done like a 10 down to a number 1 or anything like that. All I've done is I've tried to write down on paper some of the guys who I've listened to from being a young kid, getting into rock music, getting to a certain point in my career where I can get out and play gigs in front of people, and then obviously joining EVILE and getting EVILE going and getting a little bit dirty with the guys that I've been watching. So, like I said, no particular order. Number 1, let's get the obvious one out of the way first. You can't talk about thrash and you can't talk about drummers without mentioning the god himself, Mr. Vinnie Paul. So anything from Pantera's back catalogue, my favourite is Cowboys. I think that was probably because it's the first album I heard by Pantera. I had to go backwards to listen to some of the earlier stuff, obviously. But it was something that me and Mike always used to listen to together when we were out drinking and everything. And I think Domination became my song to think of Mike. So whenever I'm out and about and Domination comes on, I'll try and drink as many drinks as possible until that track actually finishes. That's my little personal game that I set myself. I remember one time we were in a bar in Germany and I had a bottle in between every slot in my fingers while I was slurping away at them all. So that was pretty interesting. But yeah, so number 1 is Cowboys from Hell, Pantera. Number 2, it's a little bit different, a little bit of a juxtaposition, but still kind of thrashy in its own right. One of the first people that I used to jam with was a guy called Ben, and he was an amazingly talented vocalist and rhythm guitar player and a decent lead player as well. But he introduced me to Machine Head, and it was around the Burn My Eyes time, and I was absolutely blown away by Chris Kontos as a drummer. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. I mean, I'd heard similar. Igor was doing some similar kind of stuff with Sepultura, but I think for me, Chris made it more accessible. And I kind of deciphered it a little bit better in my head, and yeah, that album just blew me away. Just the ferocity of it, the intensity that Chris was playing the drums, and I was fortunate, was it last year, year before? I managed to see them on the 25th anniversary tour of that album, and the guy hasn't lost a step. He's absolutely incredible. I had the pleasure of meeting him. He's such a humble, down-to-earth guy. Love him to bits. So yeah, number 2, Burn My Eyes, Machine Head. Number 3, let me just scribble these out so I'm not repeating myself. Number 3 is going to be a bit of a weird one, and it's a bit of a Marmite choice really, but The Darkness, Permission to Land. I absolutely love that album. As far as debut albums go, I think it's iconic. They are so tongue-in-cheek at The Darkness, but that overshadows the technical ability in the band, and as far as in my top 10 live bands of all time, I think they're up there, definitely. As far as a bunch of 4 guys on stage can make a load of noise, tight, with a load of flamboyancy, Justin's vocals are something else. I'm a massive fan of high-soaring vocals anyway, and the delivery, the intensity, the subject matter of the songs, and in my eyes, these days, they're the only 2 guitarists in Dan and Justin Hawkins that can make a Les Paul sound like a Les Paul. So you might want to argue with that point with me. But you think of the iconic guys over the years that have played Les Pauls, you know, like Peter Green and, you know, Gary Moore, people like that, Slash. I think Justin and Dan from The Darkness need their own Gibson endorsement or something, because they take the sound that I have in my head when I think about a Les Paul guitar and they manifest it both live and on record. Influences are like from Queen and stuff like that, and the tracks are just bangers. There's riffs everywhere. Justin's lead work is incredible, and it's an album I hold really dear, is Permission to Land. So that's my number 3. Number 4, Heartwork by Carcass. So same thing really. Me and Mike used to go drinking in a little bar in town in Huddersfield called the West Riding. And I remember it was getting quite late in the day when we were drinking one night, and Mike went over to the DJ booth and asked for a track and came back. And when the drums hit, I was absolutely blown away. It was everything that, to me, heavy metal drums should sound like recorded. Just big, deep, aggressive, loads of body. You can hear the air being moved in the drums. And as far as death metal and grind goes, same thing. It was really accessible for me, and it helped me decipher what goes into that style of playing. Ken Owen absolutely just owned that recording. And you listen to something like Buried Dreams, that's probably got to be in my top 3 metal tracks of all time, purely because the riff absolutely bangs, the drums slap you in the face, everything about it, from the solo work to the vocals, the delivery, the ferocity of it, the intent in which it's delivered, that kind of set the standard in my head for what I think that kind of music should sound like. And that's another one of those albums in my top 3. Carcass, Heartwork, definitely. I'm going to go right the way back to 1985, and next one is Spreading the Disease, Anthrax. So again, with the high soaring vocals and people that are on point in the upper echelons of registers, Joey Belladonna for me is a fantastic live singer, and he's fantastic recorded as well. But I think I got into Anthrax really from listening to I think some tracks were on video games while I was playing them when I was a kid. And then I kind of went back and listened to the first album, and it's so melodic, but so ferocious at the same time. I've met Charlie Benanti on a few occasions, and he's a lovely guy as well. We've done a couple of interviews and hung out together backstage at a couple of festivals. We've played together with Anthrax from time to time, and it always astounds me how they never miss a beat. They're so tight, and they're so effortlessly in sync with each other. They've been around each other's company for so many years, and you hear rumours about people not liking each other and not getting on anymore, but none of that when they're on stage comes across, I don't think. And I think that first incarnation, well, that I encountered of Anthrax, is probably one of the best live bands I've ever seen in my life. They've gone through some, a couple of lineup changes and people coming in and out and stuff like that. One of the most underrated drummers that doesn't get talked about in the circles ever is John Dett. John Dett, when I saw him live playing with Anthrax, was a completely different beast. And I think, from what I gathered, he was playing Charlie Benanti's kit, but set up the wrong way because he's a lefty, which just blew my mind. He made it his own and just didn't break a sweat all night, just effortless mastery of an instrument. So, for that reason, Anthrax and like Charlie Benanti and John Dett, they're two drummers that I look up to massively. Speed of the feet, technical ability around the top of the kit, the placement of the cymbals and where they attack the kit and stuff like that is something that I learned from a very early age. But I just love Joy's delivery of some of the tracks on that. Like, you listen to AIR, the first track, when it kicks in, it's just like being punched in the face. AIR is so good. You got Armed and Dangerous on the album, which just gallops like mad for, best part of 6-7 minutes, I think. And then it all backs off and you get this awesome stomper in Medusa. Hearing that album for the first time when I was a kid just blew my mind. And then I forgot about it for a few years and kind of went back. So I'm glad I did, and it's always good to hang around the Anthrax guys. They make us feel very welcome. So yeah, Spreading the Disease, Anthrax, that's another one. Where are we going to go now? What's next on the list? Total Curveball. When I was a kid, my dad used to be a musician, and he still is a musician. My mum was a musician. But they used to go out and they used to gig, they used to tour, they used to do all kinds of stuff that I'm doing now. And late at night, my dad had come back from the gig, he'd put all the equipment away in the garage and all that kind of stuff, and he'd come in, and we had a home bar in the front room. He built it out of stone himself, and it was a place for my mum and dad to wind down on an evening after they'd done gigs and stuff like that. So the babysitter would go, my dad would get back home, my mum would get back home or whatever, they'd sit up and have a drink. And one of the things that my dad used to do, without fail, late in the evening, early morning, is put Jeff Wayne's musical version of The War of the Worlds on. And when you're, I was 7 or 8, some of Herbie Flowers' bass lines on that album are absolutely terrifying. They put the fear of God in me. I'd hear it through the floorboards of my bedroom. There's a part where the narrator, Richard Burton's, talking about how the Martians are escaping from the cylinders that have crashed. And there's a part where one of the lids unscrews and Herbie Flowers is playing this amazing bass line, setting the scene behind it all. And that used to terrify me as a kid. I was convinced in maybe 1989, going into 1990, that because it was the turn of the decade, that aliens were all of a sudden going to start invading because it was now the future, which is absolutely ridiculous to think back now. But as a kid, that's the kind of stuff that used to play on my mind. Like, are aliens going to invade? And to me, War of the Worlds was the soundtrack of that happening. I associated the two so closely, so stupidly. But as an adult, I grew to love that album. The performances on it are fantastic. And I've seen some of the modern incarnations of it. And no matter who's singing, no matter who's doing the narration, well, they got like Liam Neeson in for a little while. And then a couple of guys afterwards. I believe Nathan James was doing some vocals for it for a while from Inglorious. The core of the delivery and the music is still the same, and it's always been Herbie Flowers playing bass through it, and that is why that's one of my Desert Island discs. I think if I was trapped on a desert island, I'd definitely take Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds. It's just a really, really good meter of humanity struggling against something that's beyond their control but still winning the day, much like akin to what's going on at the moment with coronavirus. We'll find a way through it, and I think that speaks to people at a core level, that album. So that's another one of my favourite. Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, the musical version. Next one, back to the metal. We can't talk about metal thrash, we can't talk about my drumming influences without discussing Lars. Lars, for me, I discovered when I was probably 10 or 11 years old. I used to get up in the morning, I used to stick MTV on, and I used to just watch, I think it was like a top 5 countdown of the singles that were doing the best in Europe at the time. And one of the ones that was on rotation was the video for One. When I saw Lars's giant, ridiculous Tama Grand Star 2, or was it an Art Star 2 kit? I can't remember which one of the two it was now. The big white one with the black bottom heads and all the black hardware. It blew my mind. I'd never seen a drum kit like that before. Every kit I'd played on or seen or been set up on a stage somewhere was just a little 5-piece, you know, a single kick, 2 up, 1 down, and a guy just, you know, tapping away, all that kind of stuff. Lars made far more sense at that age to me than any other drummer I'd ever seen. And the footwork part, you know, everyone knows that it's iconic now, but the entirety of And Justice for All was a complete revelation to me. It set me on a completely different musical path when I was like 11 years old. My dad got me into old 50s rock and roll because he used to front a Chuck Berry tribute band and things like that. So rock and roll, 50s stuff was always in our house, as was jazz, as was blues. So for me, hearing Metallica do that with that level of intensity, that just derailed my head in terms of drumming and what I wanted to aspire to be. And then obviously that wasn't the first album, but I didn't know it. So I learned pretty much all of And Justice for All on, you know, guitar, drums, vocally, everything about it. I just loved that album. And then I went backwards and listened to all their previous stuff, you know, Kill 'Em All, Puppets, Ride the Lightning, all that kind of stuff. And I think Lars very, very, you know, quickly became my favourite drummer of all time. I tried to emulate him. The kit that I had at the time was a Pearl Export, like entry-level kit. I did that up with black heads, and I tried to get all the boom stands with the counterweights and everything just to look like Lars. The guy I was talking about earlier, Ben, we used to jam Metallica stuff, and Ben had this uncanny ability to play rhythm and lead to most of the Metallica stuff without making the guitar sound empty. He was such a talented guy, and I've been in a few bands over the years with him, and I hope he's still playing music because he was a really talented dude. But yeah, that's one of my earliest memories of playing metal, is playing that kind of stuff, Machine Head and Metallica and Justice for All with him. So that's probably my #1 album of all time. If I couldn't have heard And Justice for All at that really critical evolutionary stage in my playing, I don't think I'd be playing what I'm playing now with EVILE. So I've got a lot to say thank you for to Lars. He gets his haters, people speak about him in a derogatory manner all the time, but I don't think people realise that a lot of the bands that we listen to today wouldn't be anything without Lars Ulrich. So for that, I take my hat off, sir. That's the big one out of the way. Again, I'm going to throw a curveball, and our next album is going to be Under Lock and Key by Dokken. Dokken's a band I used to listen to when I was a kid, but then totally forgot about for years and years and years. And then everything goes full circle, and you kind of listen to stuff again, and you hear it in a different way. So I was listening to a load of Dokken stuff, and I forgot how much Don Dokken's voice resonates with me. I love his delivery, I love his presence in his voice, I love the power, and of all those hair metal bands and hair rock bands of that era, Dokken had something a little bit more to them. I think it was a combination of the personnel in the band. You got George Lynch, who, you know, effortless mastery of guitar. No one can touch him. He's so unique. You hear a run of notes and you instantly know it's him. Obviously Jeff Pilson on bass, played with, you know, God knows how many bands of that era. But his work on bass is unique as well. You got Mad Mick Brown on, you know, on drums. Wild Mick Brown, sorry. And I think when a band is that good individually, and then on stage, and they all work together and become something more than the sum of their parts, I think that's as well as what stood Dokken out from the rest. I mean, Under Lock and Key as an album, it varies so much. It's not just a straight bang, bang, bang hair rock album. Starts with really, really eerie, you know, start of Unchained in the Night. Sounds pretty serene, really, and a bit sinister, and you wonder where it's going. And then this riff just comes and smacks you in the head, and you're like, oh, yeah, I can get on this. And then, you know, you listen to that track, it goes through a big meander into The Hunter, nice, steady stomper. You got amazing power ballad on there, The Slipping Away. It's absolutely heart-wrenching. And that's probably down to Don Dokken's vocal delivery. You feel every note he's singing, and then George Lynch comes out of nowhere with one of the best guitar solos ever written, in my opinion. And then as soon as that's done, you think, oh, where's this going next? And Lightning Strikes Again hits you in the face, and you're just blown away with the intensity. I'd have loved to have seen Dokken live in Japan in the mid-80s, because it'd have been something to behold. They were absolutely untouchable in my eyes of that ilk of musicianship. So yeah, Under Lock and Key, Dokken, that's another one. Next one, another weird one, really. I mean, it's still metal, but it's not metal in a thrash vein at all. But it is where I kind of stole a lot of licks from, and it's how I learned and taught myself. Just dropped my pen. It's how I taught myself double kicks, and I think because of the funness of these albums, it made me want to listen more and made me want to decipher more. So the next, it's a double one, really, because it's all based around the same guy. Olaf Heyer is one of the best vocalists I've ever heard in my life. But this is going power metal now, so I'm sorry, it's not thrash, it's going power metal. King of the Nordic Twilight by Luca Turilli, the guy from Rhapsody. And an album called Anima Mundi from a band called Dionysus. So the key between those two is Olaf Heyer. He was vocalist for both albums. Very similar albums, very triumphant, typical pure power metal, talking about dragons and, you know, it's fantasy rock, fantasy metal, but musicianship on those albums is something else. It's something to behold. Tying in with my love of soaring vocals, I don't think there's anyone better to sing metal in that kind of band than Olaf Heyer. He's versatile, he's got this ability to transverse octaves like you wouldn't believe, and hold and sustain notes. Drumming wise, I might have to do a bit of quick research on this, but if I remember rightly, Luca Turilli's drummer never changed, and it was Robert Honecker Rizzo, I think. I'm not entirely sure about that. I know it was Ronnie Milanovic on... I'll say that again. Ronnie Milanovic on Anima Mundi, Dionysus album. But they're both playing a similar style, very similar vein, and they play for the band, but you can hear the energy and intensity behind it. And that, for me, brings out the double kicks. It brings out a lot of the fills that follow the vocal patterns and the guitar patterns. No one's overplaying. Everyone's playing what's needed, but the composite of everything together just makes it sound huge. So yeah, King of the Nordic Twilight, there's a track on there called Black Dragon. Me and Ol used to listen to it incessantly when we both worked together in a shop, much to the detriment of everyone else in there, customers and staff. But we used to sing along to it. We used to take the piss out of each other because, you know, we're trying to hit the high notes while we're trying to serve customers. It was just hilarious. But it was always on rotation, and other people in the shop grew to like it because it's accessible, and we worked in a computer game store, so it kind of fit with what was being sold, you know, fantasy games, fantasy computer games, all that kind of stuff, RPGs and whatever else. And a lot of the other staff ended up actually asking us to put it on. They didn't know the name of it. They were just like, "Oh, put that power metal shit on." So we did. But I'd love to see Rhapsody live. I don't know if the lineup's changed now, and I don't know if Olaf is singing with another project. But at that era, like I think it was 94, was it 2004 when this album came out? I'm not entirely sure. But check it out, King of the Nordic Twilight, and it's part of a trilogy. It's the first of a trilogy is that album. And Anima Mundi by Dionysus looks like it's got what's he called? The guy from Lord of the Rings on the front cover, Viggo Mortensen. So you'll know that when you see it. Have a Google and try and find it on YouTube. But that's an amazing album. Some of the guitar work on it's fantastic, and the vocals are just. And I think they might have both been mixed and engineered by Sasha Paith, if I'm right. Might have to have a look into that as well. But yeah, King of the Nordic Twilight by Luca Turilli. Check it out. It's an amazing album. That takes us to... where are we? Ooh, possibly last one. Don't know. No, I'm going to talk about two albums. Two albums that are really important to me. One of them I have all to thank for introducing me to, because I never ever would have heard of Annihilator otherwise. I was going down the Slayer, Metallica, Exodus, Sepultura route, and he threw me this curveball of Annihilator, and it was Criteria for a Black Widow and a guy called Ray Hartman. There's something about that album for me, and it's one of the best thrash albums I've ever heard in my life. Production wise, playing wise, the songs on the album are amazing. Right from Bloodbath as it kicks off, you know you're in for something special. And I loved Randy Rampage's vocals anyway on the earlier stuff, but for me this was far more powerful. It resonated with me in a different way. It was like aggressive and visceral and dirty and mean and everything that I wanted it to sound like before. I love the stuff on Alice in Hell, Coburn Fire and Randy's early stuff, but Criteria's something else. And same kind of thing. I tried to steal as much of Ray Hartman as I possibly could to put into EVILE stuff. I'd like to think it was almost like a symbiotic thing whereby I knew Ray was always there doing his thing, and I know he stopped playing with Annihilator and they went to Mike Mangini, and Jeff's got an amazing lineup of guys with him right now. But for me, that is iconic Annihilator. I love Criteria. Some of the songs on it are, what we got on there? Loving the Sinner. Amazing. Schizos Are Never Alone, part 2 or 3. Can't remember which it is on there. What else we got? Oh, it's just too many. Every track's amazing, and it never gets boring listening to that album for me. And now my playing has kind of come on a little bit. I'm able to tap along to stuff now that I was never able to tap along to before. The vocabulary's there in my head to be able to play along to stuff like that now. Whereas it always used to be a, wow, I wish I could do that. Whereas now it's like, yeah, I get that now, and I appreciate the workmanship and the craft behind the playing. Ray Hartman will always be in my top 3 drummers ever, because he to me is the epitome of what a thrash drummer should be like. You play sympathetically to what's going on with the guitars, and you riff around what's going on vocally. I'd like to think I pinched as much of that as possible as I could and stole as much of that as I could from Ray. So Ray, if you're watching this, thank you so much. You're a legend. The next one is going to be my last one, but it's not a metal album, but it's definitely an album that drummers should listen to. Much like And Justice for All was my metal drumming bible, this next one's an instrumental album by Jeff Beck. It's called Blow by Blow. It's a mid-70s instrumental album. He had some amazing musicians guest on it with him. Stevie Wonder played clavinova on it, I think. And George Martin of Beatles fame, he produced the album. So it had massive fanfare around it when it came out. But not a lot of people know the drummer. He was a guy called Richard Bailey. And I believe at the time that the band went into the studio to record it, I think he was either 17 or 18, and he did most of the tracks in one take. And I don't think he read dots. I don't think he had any kind of music or notation. He was purely going off of what they'd had rehearsal-wise and going off feel. So that album for me is a huge feel album. It's got some amazing tracks on it. There's one on there called Constipated Duck, which is, it sounds ridiculous, but the pocket playing that Richard has on that album and that song is incredible. But then you've got stuff like Thelonious, you've got, is it Highway Jam or Freeway Jam? I can't remember which of the two. It's a very musical drummers album, and the chops that Richard lays down on that album is something that every drummer should really listen to and study, because it's eye-opening what you can put into an album and make things sound heavy and drive with less. As busy as you can be with your hands and your feet all the time, I think that album is it's a lesson in space, and less is more sometimes. So yeah, that's another album to listen to for all you budding aspiring drummers. I listened to that album first when I was about 7 years old, and I didn't get it. I just loved it. I loved the bounce and the rhythm of it, and how it went from one track to another so effortlessly. And I didn't expect it to be a drum album, but somehow it crept up, and that's also in my top 5 drum albums of all time. It's just effortlessly good. I'm going to stop waffling on. I'm going to get a drink and just wind down for the evening, but I just want to say thank you to everyone for watching this. I hope my little bits of insight have, well, given you some insight. I hope I haven't bored the pants off anyone, and check out our new album. It's coming out April 30th on Napalm Records, and it's called Hell Unleashed, and our single is doing the rounds on YouTube now. Check it out. Thank you, guys.